The silence in room 304 was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic scratching of 30 pencils against paper. It was midterm exam week at Oak Creek High, a sprawling, modern institution in suburban Virginia that prided itself on academic excellence and immaculate hallways. Sarah Vance, the school's unassuming history teacher, paced the aisles with a soft, deliberate gait. To her colleagues, Sarah was the quiet, cardigan-wearing staff member who never attended happy hours and graded papers with meticulous precision. To anyone with a trained eye, her movement was a perimeter sweep. She didn't just walk, she scanned blind spots, checked exits, and analyzed the baseline behavior of every student in the room. She paused near the back row, where a loose floor vent usually rattled. Today, it was silent. Too silent. Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly behind her wire-rimmed glasses. She crouched down, pretending to tie a shoelace, her hand brushing against the underside of a student's desk. Empty. She shifted her weight, glancing at the underside of the radiator cover next to the window. There, tucked deep within the metal grating, was a tiny, matte black object. It wasn't gum, and it wasn't a lost earbud. Sarah's pulse remained steady, a result of years of conditioning she had legally buried under a heavy redaction marker. With a sleight of hand that would have made a magician jealous, she palmed the device and slid it into her pocket in one fluid motion. She stood up, her face a mask of bored indifference. She walked back to her desk, sitting down behind the fortress of textbooks. Under the cover of her desk drawer, she inspected the object. It was a listening device, not a cheap online gadget available to pranksters, but a high-fidelity, continuous transmission audio bug with a localized power source. This was military-grade hardware. Someone wasn't just pranking the history class, someone was actively conducting surveillance on minors. The bell rang, shattering the tension. "Pencils down, pass them forward," Sarah commanded, her voice calm but carrying an edge that made the students instantly obey. As the room cleared, a lanky sophomore named Jason lingered, looking nervous. He glanced at the radiator, then at Sarah, before rushing out. Sarah noted the micro-expression of guilt. She didn't stop him. Not yet. She waited until the room was empty, then locked the door. She pulled a small, modified radio frequency detector from her purse, an item no history teacher should own, and switched it on. The device chirped softly. She swept the room. The signal spiked near the whiteboard, then again near the flag. There wasn't just one microphone. Room 304 was wired for stereo sound. Sarah stared at the empty desks. Someone was listening to every word spoken in this room, and she was going to find out who and why before the final bell rang. Sarah sat at her desk, the classroom door locked and the blinds drawn tight. The high-tech bug sat on the wood-grain surface, an ominous black beetle against the pristine varnish. She knew she had a limited window of time. If the device was transmitting in real time, whoever was on the other end might already know she had found it. But the lack of immediate response, no security guards bursting in, no sudden PA announcements, suggested the monitoring was passive, recorded to a server for later review. That gave her an advantage, but a slim one. She needed to trace the receiver. The signal strength on her handheld scanner indicated a hardwired relay nearby. Wireless bugs of this caliber usually dumped their data to a local node to avoid long-range detection. Sarah removed her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose. The quiet teacher persona was slipping away, replaced by the tactical analyst she used to be. She moved to the drop ceiling tiles near the projector. Standing on a sturdy chair, she pushed a tile aside. Dust motes danced in the shaft of light. There, running along the HVAC duct, was a thin, gray cable that didn't belong to the school's standard electrical infrastructure. It was shielded fiber optic cable, expensive and fast. She traced it visually. It snaked through the plenum space, heading north, toward the administrative wing. "Smart," Sarah whispered to herself. "Hide it in the chaos of the renovation wiring." Suddenly, a knock at the door made her freeze. She dropped the tile back into place and stepped down silently. She checked the peephole. It was Mr. Henderson, the overly enthusiastic guidance counselor, who always smelled of stale coffee and desperation. Sarah unlocked the door, opening it just enough to block his view of the interior. "Sarah, just checking in," Henderson chirped, his eyes darting past her shoulder. I heard you had a bit of a rigorous exam today. Wanted to see if Jason Miller was okay. He seemed agitated in the hallway. Sarah's internal threat assessment spiked. Why was the counselor asking about Jason immediately after the class? He seemed fine, Paul. Just test anxiety. Why? Henderson laughed nervously, wringing his hands. Oh, you know, he's been flagging in my system. Just want to make sure the environment is conducive to learning. We want them to feel safe to speak their minds, right? Safe to speak, Sarah repeated, her voice flat. Of course. She watched him walk away. Henderson wasn't just checking in, he was fishing. He knew about the surveillance. Sarah closed the door and locked it again. She grabbed her bag. She wasn't going to the teacher's lounge for lunch. She was going to the server room in the basement, and she needed a way to bypass a digital lock that cost more than her annual salary. The game had just escalated. The basement of Oak Creek High was a labyrinth of boiler pipes, storage cages, and the humming drone of the massive HVAC units. It was strictly off-limits to students and most staff, but the custodial keycard Sarah had borrowed from the janitor's unattended cart in the cafeteria worked perfectly on the service elevator. The air down here was cool and smelled of ozone and damp concrete. Sarah moved with efficient silence, her rubber-soled shoes making no sound on the polished cement. She wasn't looking for the boiler, she was looking for the server farm that the district had installed 2 years ago during the Technology Upgrade Initiative. At the time, it seemed like overkill for a high school. Now, it made perfect sense. It wasn't about internet speed, it was about data storage, massive amounts of it. She found the server room behind a heavy steel door labeled IT Maintenance Authorized Personnel Only. The keypad glowed red. Sarah didn't hack it, that would leave a digital footprint. Instead, she used a can of compressed air from her bag, turning it upside down to freeze the mechanism, then struck the solenoid with a sharp, calculated blow from a heavy stapler. The lock clicked open. Low-tech solutions were often the most invisible. Inside, the room was bathed in the eerie blue glow of server racks. Fans whirred aggressively. Sarah moved to the main terminal. She didn't need a password to see the physical connections. She traced the gray fiber-optic cables she had seen in the ceiling. They all fed into a standalone rack in the corner, separated from the student Wi-Fi network. This rack was labeled Project Echo. She plugged a flash drive into the terminal, launching a brute force decryption script she had written years ago for a very different kind of mission. While the bar loaded, she scanned the file directories. The folders weren't organized by subject, they were organized by location: cafeteria, locker room B, principal's office, and room 304. She clicked on room 304. Audio files. Thousands of them, dating back 6 months. Sarah's stomach tightened. They weren't just listening for threats, they were archiving everything. Teenage gossip, confessions of cheating, family secrets whispered between friends, medical issues discussed with the nurse. It was a blackmail goldmine. Suddenly, the sound of heavy boots echoed from the hallway outside. Security. Not the old man who slept at the front desk, but the private contractors the school board had hired last month. Sarah yanked her drive, the download only halfway complete. She looked for an exit. There was none, save for a ventilation grate high on the wall. She scrambled up the racks, hauling herself into the vent just as the steel door swung open. Through the slats, she watched 2 men in tactical vests enter the room. They weren't carrying flashlights, they were carrying sidearms. Sarah lay motionless in the cramped ventilation shaft, controlling her breathing to be shallow and silent. Below her, the 2 men scanned the server room. They were professionals: efficient movement, trigger discipline, minimal communication. One of them touched the terminal Sarah had just used. Thermal residue on the keys, the man grunted. Someone was just here. Sweep the floor, check the cameras, the second man commanded. His voice was familiar. Sarah peered through the grate, adjusting her angle. It was the vice principal, Mr. Garrick. The man who usually gave boring speeches about dress codes was now holding a suppressed pistol and commanding a private mercenary. The contrast was jarring, even for Sarah. If they accessed the echo files, we have a breach, Garrick said, his tone devoid of his usual administrative warmth. Find them. If it's a student, we scare them into silence. If it's staff, we handle it. They left the room, the heavy door clanging shut. Sarah waited a full 10 minutes before moving. She shimmied backward through the vent, dropping down into the custodial closet 3 rooms away. She brushed the dust off her cardigan and checked her phone. The flash drive had captured enough. She had the index files. She knew who they were targeting. One name appeared repeatedly in the logs: Leo Vance. Her nephew. Sarah froze. Leo attended this school. He was the reason she had taken this quiet job, to be close to the only family she had left after her brother's death. She had thought she was protecting him by being nearby, but she had been blind. The surveillance wasn't just random data harvesting. It was focused. They were building a profile on Leo. She exited the closet and blended into the passing period crowd. The hallway was a river of noise and chaos, the perfect cover. She needed to find Leo. She navigated the crowded corridors, her eyes scanning for his messy brown hair. She found him by his locker, laughing with a friend. He looked innocent, safe. But as she approached, she saw Jason, the nervous boy from her history class, watching Leo from the corner, whispering into his phone. Sarah grabbed Leo's arm, perhaps a little too firmly. "Miss Vance? Aunt Sarah?" he asked, startled. "Quiet," she whispered, steering him to the library. "We need to talk, now. Have you said anything at all, near the radiators in my classroom or in the locker room?" Leo looked confused, then terrified. I talked about Dad, about the insurance money. Why?" Sarah's blood ran cold. The insurance settlement from her brother's death was substantial, enough to draw predators, but this felt bigger than money. "Go to the library. Sit in the back. Do not speak to anyone. Do not text. I'm going to fix this." She turned to leave, but stopped. Standing at the end of the hallway, staring directly at her, was Mr. Garrick. He smiled, a cold, shark-like expression, and tapped his ear. He was listening. Sarah didn't run. Running attracted attention. She walked directly toward Vice Principal Garrick, channeling the energy of a disgruntled teacher rather than a cornered operative. The hallway was thinning out as the bell rang, leaving them in a tense, echoing standoff near the trophy case. "Mr. Garrick," Sarah said, her voice projecting just enough to be heard by the lingering students, "we need to discuss the budget for the history department, immediately." Garrick's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. "I'm afraid my schedule is full, Miss Vance, but please, step into my office. We can consolidate our calendars." It was a trap. She knew it. He knew she knew, but she needed to get him away from the students. "Lead the way," she said. Inside the administration wing, the atmosphere changed. The receptionist was gone. The blinds were drawn. Garrick ushered her into his office and closed the door. The lock clicked automatically. He didn't sit behind his desk. He leaned against it, crossing his arms. "You're overqualified for this job, Sarah," Garrick said smoothly. "I saw your file when you applied, or rather, I saw the lack of one. The gaps in your resume scream government work. I assume that's how you found the device so quickly." "You're spying on children, Garrick," Sarah said, dropping the act. Her stance shifted, weight balanced, ready to strike. "Recording confessions, gathering leverage? Who are you selling it to? Marketing firms? Identity thieves?" Garrick laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Think bigger, Sarah. This is an elite prep zone. These kids are the future senators, CEOs, and judges of America. We aren't selling data. We are curating compliance. We catch them doing something wrong, drugs, cheating, hate speech, and we bury it for a fee. Or we keep it and we own them for life. It's an investment strategy." "It's illegal," Sarah stated, her eyes scanning the room for weapons. "It's essential," Garrick countered, "and you're going to help us maintain it, because if you don't, that recording of Leo talking about where he hid his father's illegal handgun, that goes straight to the police. He'll be tried as an adult. Your brother's legacy ruined." Sarah felt a surge of cold rage. They had set Leo up. The insurance money talk was a decoy. They had manipulated him into admitting to a crime he likely didn't commit just to have leverage over her. "You think you have leverage," Sarah said softly, stepping closer. "But you made a mistake. You assumed I'm here to teach history." Garrick reached for the panic button under his desk. Sarah moved. She didn't punch him. She slammed her open palm into his solar plexus, collapsing his airway, then swept his legs. He hit the carpet with a wheeze. She zip-tied his hands with a loop she pulled from her hair bun before he could catch his breath. "I'm here to rewrite it," she whispered. She grabbed his master keycard and his laptop. She had to get to the PA system. The school was quiet, settling into the rhythm of the third period. Sarah left Garrick gasping on his office floor, gagged with his own silk tie. She knew she had less than 5 minutes before the security contractors realized their boss wasn't responding to radio checks. She moved swiftly toward the main security hub, adjacent to the principal's office. She swiped Garrick's keycard. The light turned green. Inside, banks of monitors displayed every corner of the school. But Sarah wasn't interested in the video, she wanted the audio. She found the main control board for the Project Echo system. It was a massive mixing board, feeding audio from hundreds of hidden mics into the central server. She needed to burn it down. Not physically, that would trigger fire alarms and evacuation protocols that would get Leo hurt in the chaos, but digitally, she needed to expose them. She plugged Garrick's laptop into the PA system's override port. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. She wasn't just going to delete the files, she was going to broadcast them. She queued up a specific folder she had flagged earlier, Garrick's own office recordings. He was arrogant enough to record his meetings with the investors. "Attention Oak Creek High," Sarah's voice rang out over the intercom, calm and authoritative. "Please excuse the interruption. There will be no history lesson today. Instead, we're going to listen to a lecture on civics and corruption." She hit play. Garrick's voice boomed through the hallways, clear and undeniable. "The parents will pay anything to keep their little angels out of jail. We squeeze the Millers for another 50 grand, or we leak the photos of their daughter. It's simple economics." The school froze. In classrooms, cafeterias, and gyms, students and teachers looked up at the speakers in shock. Sarah locked the security room door just as the handle jiggled violently. "Open up," a voice roared outside. The private security team. They began to ram the door. The steel frame held, but not for long. Sarah looked at the monitors. She saw confusion turning into anger in the hallways. Students were coming out of class. Teachers were gathering. She needed an exit strategy, but she was trapped in the center of the web. She scanned the monitors for Leo. He was in the library, standing up, looking at the ceiling speaker. He looked scared. Then she saw something on camera 4. Jason, the nervous kid from her class, was walking down the hall. He wasn't looking at the speakers. He was walking toward the security room, and he was holding a fire axe he had taken from the emergency case. The heavy thud of bodies hitting the security room door was rhythmic and terrifying. Sarah braced a heavy filing cabinet against the entrance, buying herself seconds. Over the intercom, Garrick's recorded voice continued to spill the school's darkest secrets, implicating the principal, several board members, and the private security firm. The facade of the pristine high school was crumbling in real time. On the monitor, Sarah watched Jason approach the door from the outside. The security guards didn't see him. They were focused on breaching the room. Jason raised the fire axe. Sarah expected him to attack the guards, a chaotic attempt to help. Instead, Jason swung the axe into the power junction box on the wall next to the door. Sparks showered the hallway. The lights in the security wing died instantly. The electronic locks disengaged. The magnetic seal on the door released. The security guards stumbled in the sudden darkness. Sarah didn't hesitate. She kicked the filing cabinet aside and burst out, using the confusion and her low-light tactical experience to her advantage. She checked the first guard with a shoulder charge, sending him into the wall, and ducked under the grasp of the second. "Miss Vance, run!" Jason screamed, dropping the axe. Sarah grabbed Jason by the collar of his shirt, dragging him with her as they sprinted toward the west stairwell. "Why did you do that?" she demanded, pushing him through the fire doors. I knew, Jason panted, terrified. I knew they were listening. Garrick threatened to expel me if I didn't spy on Leo. I couldn't take it anymore. They reached the ground floor. The school was in full riot mode. Students were streaming out of classrooms, parents were calling, and sirens wailed in the distance. The police, the real police, were coming. "Where is Leo?" Sarah asked, scanning the chaotic crowd. "He went to the basement," Jason said, his eyes wide. "He said he had to get his phone. He said the evidence was on his phone in his locker, in the gym basement." "The gym doesn't have a basement," Sarah said, stopping dead. A cold realization washed over her. The gym was built on a slab. The only basement access near the gym was the old fallout shelter entrance, a relic from the 50s that the school had sealed off. He said Garrick told him to meet him there if things went wrong," Jason stammered. It was a contingency plan. Garrick had a backup site, and he had Leo. Sarah looked at Jason. "Get outside, find the police, tell them everything." "Where are you going?" "To teach a final lesson," Sarah said grimly. She turned and ran back into the building, heading toward the gym. She wasn't a teacher anymore. She was a hunter. The entrance to the old fallout shelter was hidden behind a stack of wrestling mats in the equipment storage room. The air was thick with the smell of old rubber and sweat. Sarah pushed the mats aside, revealing a rusted iron wheel door. It was slightly ajar. She drew a deep breath, centering herself. She had no weapon, only her environment. She picked up a heavy metal baseball bat from a forgotten equipment bag. It wasn't standard issue, but it would have to do. She slipped through the door. The stairs spiraled down into darkness, lit only by a faint strip of emergency LEDs running along the floor. The air grew colder. At the bottom, the space opened up into a concrete bunker. It wasn't empty. It had been converted into a high-tech command center, far more advanced than the server room upstairs. In the center of the room, Leo sat in a chair, his hands zip-tied behind him. Garrick, who must have used a secondary exit to escape his office, was pacing nervously, holding a gun. Beside him stood the principal, Mrs. Higgins, looking pale and shaking. "It's over, Garrick," Sarah called out, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. She stayed in the shadows of the stairwell. "The police are upstairs. The recordings are public. There is no way out." "There's always a way out, Sarah," Garrick snarled, pointing the gun at Leo. "We have the assets. We have the leverage. We just need a hostage to clear the perimeter." "Let the boy go. He's nothing to you," Sarah negotiated, shifting her position to flank them. "He's everything," Mrs. Higgins shouted, her voice cracking. "He's not just a student, Sarah. He's the beta test. We've been manipulating his environment for 2 years, altering his grades, planting stressors, monitoring his psychological break. He's the proof of concept for our behavioral modification program." Sarah felt a wave of nausea. It was worse than blackmail. It was human experimentation. They were trying to break Leo to see if they could rebuild him. "You're sick," Sarah whispered. She kicked a metal bucket down the stairs. The clamor was deafening. Garrick spun around, firing blindly into the dark. Sarah moved. She didn't rush him. She rushed the fuse box on the wall. She swung the bat with all her strength, smashing the breakers. The bunker plunged into pitch blackness. "Leo, get down!" she screamed. Darkness was Sarah's ally. For Garrick and Higgins, it was terror. For Sarah, it was a memory of operations in places far worse than a high school basement. She navigated by sound. She heard Garrick's panicked breathing, the scuff of his shoes on the concrete. "I can't see! Turn it back on!" Higgins shrieked. "Shut up!" Garrick yelled. A muzzle flash illuminated the room for a split second. Sarah marked his position. He was near the console, 10 feet from Leo. Sarah moved silently, removing her shoes to muffle her steps. She circled the room. She picked up a heavy paperweight from a desk in the dark and threw it hard against the far wall. Clang. Garrick fired again at the noise. Sarah sprinted in the gap between shots. She tackled him from the side, driving her shoulder into his ribs. The gun skittered across the floor. They grappled in the dark. Garrick was strong, fueled by adrenaline, but Sarah was trained to kill. She didn't kill him, she needed him alive for testimony, but she broke his arm with a precise, sickening snap. Garrick howled and went limp. "Don't move," Sarah commanded, finding the gun in the dark and securing it. "Leo, are you okay?" "I'm here." Leo's voice trembled. "I'm okay." Sarah sounded the emergency flashlight on the wall and flicked it on. Garrick was writhing on the floor. Mrs. Higgins was cowering in the corner. Sarah cut Leo's ties. "Go upstairs, Leo. The police are there. Tell them I have the suspects." Leo stood up, rubbing his wrists. He looked at Garrick, then at the banks of servers humming on the backup battery. He didn't look scared anymore. He looked curious. "Go, Leo," Sarah urged. "Wait," Leo said. He walked over to the main console. "We have to stop the upload." "What upload?" "They were sending the data off-site, to the cloud." Leo's fingers moved across the keyboard with a speed and familiarity that made Sarah pause. "I can stop it." "Leo, how do you know the command codes?" Sarah asked, the gun lowering slightly. Leo didn't answer. He typed a final command. The screen flashed red. "Upload complete." Leo turned to face Sarah. The fear was gone from his eyes, replaced by a cold, calculating intelligence that mirrored her own. "I didn't stop it, Aunt Sarah. I redirected it." The police swarmed the basement minutes later. Garrick and Higgins were handcuffed and dragged away, shouting about conspiracies and rights. Sarah was hailed as a hero, the brave teacher who uncovered a corruption ring. The news vans were parked on the lawn for a week. 3 days later, the school reopened. Sarah stood in her empty classroom, packing a box. She couldn't stay. Her cover was blown and the quiet life was over. She picked up the tiny bug she had found on the first day, rolling it between her fingers. The door opened. It was Leo. He looked every bit the normal teenager. Hoodie, backpack, headphones around his neck. "Leaving?" he asked. "I have to," Sarah said. "It's not safe for me here, or for you if I stay." Leo nodded, leaning against the doorframe. "You know, Garrick was right about one thing. The behavioral modification program, it works. But they analyzed the data wrong." Sarah stopped packing. "What do you mean?" Leo smiled, and for the first time, Sarah saw something terrifyingly familiar in his expression. It wasn't her brother's smile. It was hers. "They thought they were breaking me, but they were just teaching me how to hide. I found out about the microphones 3 months ago, Aunt Sarah. I didn't tell you because I needed them to record the right things. I needed them to record Garrick's fraud, Higgins's negligence, and your skill set." Sarah stared at him. The nervous behavior, the slip-ups, the confession about the gun, it had all been a performance. "You set this up," she whispered. "You used me to take them down." "I used the available assets," Combly corrected, "and now I have the full database, every secret, every blackmail file, every weakness of every wealthy family in this district. I sent it to a private server before you cut the power." "Leo, that's a weapon." "It's insurance," Combly said, pushing off the doorframe. "I'm not going to be a victim, Aunt Sarah. I'm going to be the one in control, just like you." He turned to leave. "Good luck with your next mission. I'll be watching." Sarah stood alone in the silence of room 304. She had saved the school, exposed the villains, and protected her family. But as she looked at the empty desk where Leo used to sit, she realized the chilling truth. She hadn't saved an innocent boy. She had inadvertently finished his training. The true listener wasn't the man in the basement. It was the boy in the back row, and he had learned from the best.